Hey, it's Joe West from the West Barn with
Mike Chimchak.
Today we've got Natural Royalty with us, Jeff Balding. He's a staple here in town, one of the finest engineers. If you're making a record and you need it to sound stellar, he is always at the top of the list. He's worked with many Grammy Award-winning artists, the Eagles, Hardy, Morgan Wallace, Don Henley, Dan and Shay, Taylor Swift, Shania Twain, Megadeth, many, many, many more, pages and pages more. He's been nominated for Grammys 6 times. And he prides himself as an advocate. I see that continually mentioned whenever your name is mentioned. It's always followed by that. So welcome to the show. Thank you for being on with us.
Man, thank you for having me.
We're here. This is your private production spot. In the background here, we're looking at all the gear. Yeah. This is where a lot of records probably end up after tracking, right?
Oh, yeah.
Do you do a lot of mixing too in this room?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm set up where I can mix here, and I do a lot of mixing here. So, I mean, nowadays with how things work, you know?
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about, some of the gear in your racks and in the way we just got off an interview with Andrew Sheps and, just the beeline towards In the Box, and you're one of these guys that you've been working on. You were on so many records whenever I was listening to a lot of CCM music coming up.
Oh, yeah.
I was only allowed to listen to Christian music for a period there, and your name was on almost all of those records. I mean, you look like you're 28, so I don't know how that actually works out.
I'll send you a check. Thank you.
But you've been working on all these large format consoles in, the massive large format room. So now it's like, it's an interesting transition. How much of your life is mixing at Ocean Way versus mixing in this room?
Most of it's here. As you would probably guess, there's a few artists, some of the larger artists, they want to, and actually I'll prep stuff here and then I'll take it to the room, but as far as spreading it out on the console and patches and just playback out of the DAW, I can't remember.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Are you doing a lot of hybrid stuff with the gear behind you, or is a lot of it in the box?
Sometimes, but I generally try to hang in the box as much as I can. Just because you always have 4 or 5 things going, and somebody calls 3 weeks later and go, I'm going to send you a part. Can you put this in?
Mm-hmm.
So I did the hybrid thing for a while, and it just got cumbersome. It's like, okay, recall this. Where's my recall sheet? And some of the gear I try to leave the same when I do that. But I've got some great stuff to split out too. I've got some Burl, D-Days, and I've got a great little summing thing that JCF Audio made me, and it sounds incredible. So when I want to go out, I can, and it's a good venture when you do.
Yeah, and if it was up to you and you could go to a big, large format room or you could mix in this room, what would you prefer?
Oh, man, I'd have to choose one or the other. There's advantages to both to me. If I go to a large format room and have the time and not have to worry about budget and stuff, I would do that. Absolutely. Because I would have all the tools kind of at your hands, But I enjoy having the flexibility and the luxury of taking time and getting away from it, coming back and knowing I'm not busting anybody's budget.
You got like the perfect situation to answer this question. It's like, what is it that when you're mixing in this room that we're seeing here, what is it that you're like, oh man, can't do that here? Is there anything? Like as you're mixing, you're like, oh, I wish I was over at so-and-so. I would do this thing.
No,
no.
I mean, I feel like, with technology and stuff, you just find little tricks. It's kind of like I always think of like when SSL came out with the console, the first console, right? Which was what, 80s. And, I was 7 and, yeah. Okay. So
I can't tell.
Yeah. So anyway, first time I worked on an SSL is like, oh, how come people like this, right? because it's such a different workflow in a sense, and it's all how you drive the beast, right? I mean, a Neve, I knew how to drive an old Neve to make it sound great and sit down and box a mix, put a, compact a mix up, but, and an API too. But when the SSL is just a little different, figuring out what made it tick, So once you got that down, then it's like, man, I love this thing. This is great too,
Right.
So I think this world is that way as well. And one of the things I've done lately is I've started mixing in Luna.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You like
and they're still tweaking some things, bringing some stuff up, but man, sonically and workflow wise, and especially sonically, I'm
explain that.
I'm really
sonically. So you're saying if you just brought the files in and didn't put any plugins in, put them out the 2-bus, it would sound different than it would on another workstation?
No, not necessarily. I'm saying that the busing, the summing plugins they have and stuff, I really like. It sort of takes me. That's what I miss about the console.
Oh yeah, you miss
summing and how you drive the gain stages and make something happen, right? And so with Luna, you kind of get to go back to that.
Yeah, well, gain staging is one of those words that everyone seems to be talking about on the internet, in Headroom, but maybe you could give us an instance, like give us an example of like maybe what you give us a good example of, walk us through a gain stage. Like, is there something you would do to your drums on an analog console to drive the subgroup or the center section? Can you give us an actual walkthrough of that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in tracking, absolutely. I mean, a Neve, one of the great things about an old Neve is that, and that you can push the preamps in varying degrees and get different things out of it. So, the old joke is you turn the preamp up until it distorts and then you back it down one, but I know that's not the case, but there is something you get with the transients and rolling off, it does something on drums when you push it. And API the same way.
Yeah,
it's just
very
so
much
different.
And unlike the API, the old 80 series Neve didn't really have a meter, and all the meters were these VU meters. So like you weren't really looking at transients on them, right? So like you got to really know with your ears whenever you've gone too far with a mic print in an 80 series, right?
Well, that's it. Yeah, you sort of put duct tape over the meter and go, what sounds great. Same with 1176s or anything you're using, and in the box now, you take not to mention UAD again, but the 1176 and the Neves and some of the compressors they've got a headroom control, right? So with everybody likes to fill up the waveform, right? Well, if you look on a VU meter, that's not even realistic, right? When you're going to that world, and those things were modeled from a VU perspective. So when you're ramming that in so hard, sometimes it's cool, but sometimes you can back it off and then crank the threshold up and get if you want to slam it, but all of a sudden it does a different thing, and the sonic spectrum totally changes.
Right. And for those who aren't familiar, like there used to be two kinds of meters: peak meters and VU meters. And VU meters would just measure sort of the loudness. If you had a flute or a bass, it would look the same on a peak and a VU meter. But if you had a snare drum, it'd be completely in the red in the peak, and the VU would go up this much. So there were some sources you had to kind of know as an engineer which ones you could push to tape a VU meter, something that's measuring just the of the sound. And if you had something super sizzly like an electric guitar that had a lot of peak, or a snare drum, well, then you had to know that you're not going to have your meters looking like there's a lot of level on them, So it took you had to be a little bit of an engineer back in the day.
Well, there's that, isn't there? Wish there was more of that nowadays. Well, and then the other complicated thing, even to add to it, was analog machines on top of it.
Well,
because
talk about that.
I can remember aligning a 24-track machine for tracks 4 or 5 times to get it to sound like you wanted it to sound.
All right.
Because we had different biases, different ways of EQing, and sometimes one track, maybe take the snare track and you want to do something a little different. So it does, but you sit there and you have the drummer play and you listen on repro and A/B to input, and then you see what tracks you want to tweak a little more. So
that's bold, man.
There's a real art to it.
Yeah. God forbid you put that. It's like, you got to remember, track 2 set up for snare drum, not for vocals.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then on top of it, you're going, okay, and we're going to make a safety tonight, or we're going to make a safety end of the week. And this is going to sound different in a month than it sounds now.
yeah.
What's it going to do? And you kind of know where you're going with the project and what happens. And so you plan for those things.
Right,
You know,
because
and
analog tape eventually does this, which is like gets warmer, gets darker, the high end droops a little bit more.
Yeah.
So eventually you got to bake it in a convection oven to get it to play at all.
Yeah. So it was, it's interesting how much romance there is around
Dude,
analog
essentially,
stuff, right? All I remember is the nightmares of it, right?
making a record in the 80s and early 90s was the equivalent of buying an ice cream cone, and you had to like finish it before it was dripping all down your sleeve, you know?
Right. It was a race, you know?
That's wild. And
luckily, it, coming off of analog tape, it was very musical. So it was very forgiving in EQ and stuff.
yeah.
So, that's a good thing.
Well, you're one of those guys that was able to truly call yourself an audio engineer. You did some engineering stuff, you know, which, it's kind of a misnomer because we're all sort of more on the creative side sonically, even though we're technical. But there's very few guys that, they're almost a degree separated from folks like you and I who were aligning tape machines, right? So it's good because we got a lot of people in the world now. I can remember getting rough mixes from the guitar player that I thought, wow, this guy really has a concept musically. He doesn't understand any of the technology, right? He's messing up multiple ways, but he's got a real vision for the blend of this, and those guys are now in our world, which I applaud. I love it because the music can be better.
That's great. No, and it challenges everybody. I mean, I love that.
And it can be worse too, because we're also, as fast as we're giving more people opportunity with access to technology, there's a handful of people that shouldn't have access to the technology and it's smearing it all over. So,
well, there's that.
Hey, well, I wanted to go back. Maybe I didn't ask the question right. So let's talk about gain staging from a fader perspective. Can you give us an example where you'll explain a trick you would do on an analog console with, like, maybe you're pushing your subgroups into the VCAs, or you're pushing the 2 mix from the subgroup, or you're pushing the center section. Can you give us an example of gain staging in a line level playback situation that people might be able to wrap their head around?
Oh, well, I mean, it sounds simple to me, but, it's really, you're going to run, trying to think how to even explain it in a simple form. I mean, you're going to push the faders out. Sometimes it's just pushing until it gets there, and then you're pulling the master fader down. Maybe you're down 10 dB, maybe you're down 5 dB.
This is what I'm looking for.
You got the master fader down, 10 dB, and then you're pushing the buses on the console going into the stereo bus.
There you go.
You're getting everything about, especially transformers, pushing those and getting,
because they react differently. Like when you were talking about the compressor, it's like if you feed it less gain and give a lot more gain reduction, you'll have it'll be a brighter sound down in there. It'll be, have more frequencies. But if you push the input to the compressor, then do the same gain reduction, it's going to be a lot darker, we'll say, or it's going to be browned out, will grayed out. And it's interesting because once you start to recognize that stuff as a guy like you're able to then set up some gags on your console where you're like, I'm going to push my faders in my drum. I'm going to bring back the subgroup, and then I'm going to hit this center section hard. And the amalgamation of all that ends up in this little special thing that isn't EQ, right?
Yeah.
It isn't compression. It's gain, right? Which generates new content, even, harmonics. So it's a really interesting.
Yeah. And it's hard to replicate. It's just with a compressor or something. And the other stage of that is pushing what's coming off your playback device, whether it's a tape machine or Pro Tools or whatever, is coming in, what you're doing with the line level coming into the console, because that part of the gain stage is also has a cool thing.
Why don't you correct me? Correct me if I'm wrong, but as a general truth, the harder you hit a circuit, the more gray or darker or fall off you're going to get, right? Of the high end, let's say.
Yeah, depending on the console. I mean, a Neve, you're going to get a darker, warmer, fatter. People call it fatter, and it's going to get a little bit grittier, and it's going to compress. You're going to get the harmonics is the grit part, and it's going to compress a little. The transients are going to round off,
right?
And an API is a little different. It might depend on how far you push it. It'll come forward and get a little edgier.
In the
and
upper
then
mid
they'll
range.
fold up. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and these are
you know,
things that whenever people listen to a Jeff Balding record, they're like, "How do you get that sound?" And you've got it up in your Pro Tool session, right? This great mix that you're referencing from Jeff Balding, and you got your thing, and you're saying like, "Oh, it's brighter." So you EQ, and you're like, "That's not it. What he's doing didn't come from EQ. It came from shaping, running it down through this myriad of things that just because you have the experience, output is this consequence. It's got a little bit of dynamic control. It's got a little bit of shaping of tonal EQ, but it just sort of sits somewhere else. And those are the magic records. Like as a kid, when I'd reference records and want to be like them, there was things about them that I was trying to get with EQ that just weren't gotten with EQ. So I was never going to get there.
Yeah, and you use when you have, I mean, it's all a tool belt. So, and that's the thing. There's several things. I'll forget the others before I finish. But the main thing I want to say is I feel like that's what is lacking with a lot of young people coming into the industry is they don't have that experience to go listen to that piece of gear and listen at what it does in different ways it's used. And that tool belt's so important, you know? I mean, to listen to something and go, oh, I know exactly what to do.
Right.
You know?
And you don't get that either. You get that. There's so many things are normal once you hit the interface at this point from a signal feed perspective. Whereas when we were starting, it was like, okay, you had the input, the ohmage of the microphone. You had the mic.
There's another thing.
You had
the ohmage of the microphone,
line in and line out, and then return to the console, how it was driving that, and then the buses in the center section, and then printing. Right.
Yeah.
So we had the opportunity that we were just like, we'd stumble across this stuff, or some old timer would say, "Hey, check it out when I do this."
Right. Yeah.
But now it's like, it's pretty uniform. So there's not a lot of happy accidents happening. Right.
No. And that's a great way to put it. I think we had a lot of happy accidents because there's a lot of variables that you would stumble into. Like you said, the ohmage of the microphone.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if anybody thinks about that, anymore, but that's a cool thing, and the same with preamps. Some preamps they accept different ohmages differently. They sound different.
I've got an old Gibson guitar with a K&K Western Mini in it that drives a 10 meg ohm load. It's really high impedance that it's looking for. And through a regular 600 ohm direct box, it sounds unusable. It sounds like like when you remember you put those tin cans with strings, it sounds like that. But if you get the right foot pedal, like the Tone Bone, the Radial Tone Bone, or a preamp that will accept the 10 meg ohm input, it opens up. And it's like, that's just ohmage. That's got nothing to do with EQ or anything. And you have that on every step in every console, in every room, every connection had some little nuance to it like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now you find yourself in this world where it's kind of figured out, but you've got all this old coolness that you're able to bring into it. Like you were talking before we went on air, you were talking about these RCA over your left shoulder. When you look at your right shoulder, these two brown little RCA line amps that, tell us the story about that. You said it was at a mastering lab that you heard them originally, or you're wondering?
Yeah, well, not these, but what I said is I used to go to Doug Sax's and have him master a lot of records for me. And I said that when I take my tapes in and we'd pull up my mixes without doing anything, they would have all this depth and just sonically be better than I'd heard them in the mix room. And so I thought, which is what kept me going back, and I haven't even do stuff because it just sounded amazing coming through there. So the last few years, it's probably been, what did I say, maybe 6 years ago, I was thinking, man, I miss that. I wish I had something that I had an option of going through that would do that thing. And one of the techs that used to work for him, I'm friends with and know, and I called him and I said, man, what can I do to get that thing, And he said, one of the circuits I love is this RCA line amp. And he said, if you'll find a pair of those, send them to me and I'll set them up. I'll do this thing to them. And he said, I think you'll like it. So the thing I didn't tell you was it took about a year for me to find a pair of them. I found one right away within a few weeks. And then I waited months for the second one to come up. And because they were this few and far between, and sometimes somebody put one up and it'd be ridiculously priced. So I was just real patient, and it finally come up, and I grabbed it. And they give you an option. And I can use them for recording or mixing. I can run a mix through them. I can, if I'm doing an overdub and I want something to just kind of have a more, more of that tube thing to it, I can run them through it. So they're really a sweet little tool to have.
A better box.
Yeah, a better box.
Better box. You think it's like, okay, dude has been making classic, like standard records that you refer to and say are great records for decades. And he's got all this skill. This is you I'm talking about.
Yeah.
He's got all this skill. And he's still smart enough to know a better box is a better box. You don't have to, like, just because you can do 100 pull-ups doesn't mean you have to do 100 pull-ups. Sometimes you just put it through the better box.
Right. Yeah. It's the same way with pushing the console, knowing those little tricks. It's like, okay, you know what? I want it to do this. I can put 8 plugins on it, or I can run it through this.
How much of your, let's say, like your process on a given song from start to finish, how much of it do you think is just knowing what to choose rather than manhandling it and being like this super, what I picture Bruce Swedien would do and when he was making a record, right? So it's genius. Like, how much of it is genius and how much of it is just knowing, like, hey, this is like juggling. I just need to keep the balls in the air and get the muscle memory and choose the right boxes to send this thing through.
I mean, a lot of us choosing the right thing, just knowing what to choose. The other part of it is I love experimenting. Yeah. I love finding new things. I love trying things and going, oh, that didn't work, or that worked. That's cool. And then you kind of try to remember it, and you'll remember it for a few months, and you'll move on to another one. And then you'll hear the record and you'll go, man, what was that? That's cool. And then you have to go back and figure it out again. But yeah, I think a lot of it's knowing. I mean, the creative process to me is a flow. And if you can stay in a flow and move with the song and the process and not have to think about, oh, I wonder what I should do that. It's kind of having a vision and then knowing what to grab in that vision to get it done.
And when did that stuff start showing up on your radar where you're like kind of had a little dresser drawer of tricks that you could go down the drawers as you needed?
I think you develop those things from the beginning. Hopefully people remember them and log them and go and realize what they're doing. I think maybe the first, year or two, I probably didn't realize when I'd stumble onto something to kind of put it in the drawer, right. But you do pretty quickly go, because somebody will go, man, I love that sound you got on that. I want that. And you're going, oh, I wonder what I did, and now after that, you start going, I want to remember that. That's kind of cool, or they like that.
What's the last, we just, in their last interview we had with Andrew, he was talking about a plugin called Freak Show Audio. It's like, right? Is that what it was, Joe? Freak Show?
Freak Show.
That was just these wild plugins. It was the most inspiring thing you heard in a long time. What would you say the last thing you discovered, like you're like super inspired by, you just,
oh man,
like whatever, it could be anything, any box you can think of.
I mean, and be honest, the latest thing that really is inspiring to me, only because it's one of those, let me run it through this and it always sounds cool, is the summing plugins on Luna. Cool. I mean, that does a thing where I'm not like reaching and going through, 8 compressors trying to figure out which one does something that I'm wanting to hear when I'm wanting to hear. Because, the thing about as I got to do, and very luckily was working analog and then eventually digital, is your ear is used to that. And that's why, a lot of people go, oh, this, digital is terrible, analog's great. But it's not that, it's that your ear is used to that. And you get used to that musicality and something that happens is the bus compression we were talking about, right? So that has been real inspiring to me the last couple of months, because it's like I get to hear that sort of thing again, right? And I get to use it in the process without going to the studio, because otherwise I have to go to the studio. And a lot of guys do this. I mean, you mix in the box, and I used to do it too. And then you go to a studio, you plug it in through the console, the faders, Unity, and you get to drive things and make it kind of have that thing. And there's a lot of guys, mixers nowadays that still do that.
I can remember, I think I met you probably 12 years ago at 12th and Porter. I don't even know if 12th and Porter is still around. I can't remember the event, but it was some sort of music business event. And I can remember meeting you and just knowing you. Like, I remember as a kid, I would read records and it would say mastered by Bob Ludwig in the wax of a record, right? Or in the vinyl of a record.
Oh, right.
Remember that in the inner circle?
Yeah.
And I can remember you were on so many records that were records that I had worn out, cassettes that I had to buy again. You're on these records. And I remember meeting you and being blown away at how kind you were. I don't remember if I had any success at that point. I doubt that I had. But I remember you being incredibly kind and really just like, they say, be careful when you meet the people that you respect, right? Or your idols, right. But I remember leaving there just like kind of thinking like, I want to be, if I ever was to make it, I'd like to be that guy. So congratulations on that, because that's a huge feat. You could totally have a level of douchery that's, much higher. You have zero douche factor, right? So we appreciate that. And I know that it seems like everywhere I was reading about you was the word advocate came up. So tell me what that means to you. Like, how are you advocating and what are you advocating? Is it about audio engineering? Is it about arts? And what is your passion?
Yeah, sure. And by the way, thank you. That means a lot to me for you to say that. And I'll just add on to that before I answer the question. When I started out, there's 2 or 3 people that were like that were industry heroes to me. And one of them was George Massenburg.
Oh, wow.
And George treated me like I was one of the guys when I first met him. Right. And we're good friends now over the years. But I was him and David Foster treated me with a lot of respect, and Bill Schnee. Wow. And that means a lot, when you meet guys that, just treat you well. So I appreciate that.
Especially when they don't have to.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I met some guys that didn't treat me real well too. So there's that. Man, as far as advocate, that has to do with, just creativity, audio integrity. I'm very involved in the producers and engineers wing at the Academy. I'm on the steering committee right now. And it's just important that we do what we can for our peers in the industry and the industry itself. And, hopefully to better it, make it, I think a big voice when you have, it's just like the P&E wing, when there's 7,000 people that has a voice, whether it's in legislation, which we got some things passed in the past several years that, mentions producers in law and things, which is a big deal, to, delivery recommendations, which is really important, and helping people just think about how they're going to deliver a product, not only that labels want it delivered a certain way, but how they preserve it for themselves as an asset. And I even tell this to students that are songwriters. I say, this applies to you, a folder hierarchy, knowing how you're organizing stuff, because if you write a song now, in 5 years, somebody may go, oh, I want to cut that. By the way, I want your multi-track because we want to buy some of the stems from you.
Right.
If you can't find it and you didn't have a safety of it, then you might be in trouble. So I think it's things like that. And it's just, I think the whole mentoring aspect of it's important to me.
Yeah.
We used to have apprenticeships. Right. Now we got universities. And it's a different beast, and I think there's something that's relational, and you learn from being in the room.
And you enjoy that, right? I mean, it feels good to be a part of other people finding what you dig about. Yeah. Seeing that in someone new, for me, I love that.
Yeah, no, it's great. And, sometimes I don't see that anything's great about something, and I'll have assistants say, man, I learned so much from you today. And it's like, well, I don't know what I did, but thank you. And it's good when you get feedback, that's a good thing. I'll have people now and then say, I came by the studio, 10 years ago, and you said this to me, and I moved to town, and I did this, and now I have this. And, I wouldn't have done it if you hadn't have said something. It's like, wow.
It's part of that deal where it's like, I remembered 12 years ago, right? You remembered George Massenburg, and these kids will remember you. It's this cool thing that it's like, you hope that that's the best part of humanity that you could put forward, especially if it's something you're passionate about that can be as great as audio can be, right? And what we do is, it's a real subsect of a subsect. If you get deep into it.
It's a very small community. I mean, that's the thing that's always blown me away is when you look at the people that's actually in this part of the industry. And the schools have kicked out a lot of people, obviously, with that degree, but yet within the industry, it's still a very small group of people.
We encourage people. I have a school called Apprentice Academy where it's a 16-week program and it's just all hands-on. Like completely, we pride ourselves on not having any reading. I wasn't a good reader. I didn't learn from reading. I learned from doing. My father taught me so many things, and the level of competency and understanding was so much greater once I did it a couple times. Right. So that's really, I love that you say apprenticeships. It's really where it's at in this world. I don't understand. I don't have an issue with people going to school for 4 years to become an audio engineer. I just don't know what they're doing past the first 16 weeks. You don't need to spend more than a period of time, 6 months with a person. Find a person that you respect and study them, learn the worldview of audio, understand it, then take it somewhere that you see it,
Yeah, I wish I never came up under an engineer when I started. I got a small little studio called me, and they wanted to hire me as their kind of chief engineer. And so, it actually came off of some demos I'd done. I went to Belmont, so I'd done some demos on a Christian band called Whiteheart.
Oh yeah.
And when Christian signed them, they hired me at the studio. The only thing I can figure is they heard the demos and said, "Oh, we need somebody," because Brown Bannister was the staff engineer before me, and he left to go produce Amy. So I got hired there, and fortunately, I started with a guy named Keith Thomas.
Oh yeah,
the producer, right? Super talented and sweetheart too. And so he pushed me. We pushed each other, and we would come in. We'd listen to CDs back then. Put them on, get inspired to create something, go, yeah, let's do that. And, 22 hour days, whatever it was, and I spent the first few years of my career like that. And so it was like boot camp, figuring it out on your own and all that. And nowadays you got the internet, you can Google something, see what somebody did, watch a YouTube video.
You can,
but back then it really was an apprenticeship mentoring situation.
Well, you can Google and YouTube, but my point to that is always you'll get a trick, but you won't understand the 360 degrees
application.
You won't get a worldview of it. You'll get how to do a vocal trick, or a Led Zeppelin drum trick. But as that applies to the rest of your mix and what you think of the world of audio, it's just a piece of data. It's so great to have a guy that's willing to be a mentor to sort of show you what the roles are, and then you interpret those roles and break the ones you can break, because we can all go supersonic every once in a while.
Right. Well, it's just like an artist being inspired by other artists.
Yeah.
You hear their song, their music, and then you digest it, and it comes out in your world how you interpret it.
Audio engineers are more important. I'm going to get some shit about this. I would take an amazing audio engineer over an amazing player in the band. If I had to choose dysfunction somewhere, I'd put it in an instrument. I think that it's an underrated, unappreciated part of the creative process. Like the guys that I really respect that are really great engineers, those guys I put them on the level of Prince in my mind. When you hear their work, I put them on a creative level of genius where it's just like, what a piece of art they just made. And they were like the driving force behind it. I think that's a bold statement, but I stand by it. I mean, it's so important. The engineer behind our name is kind of like a misnomer.
Right.
I don't know. I won't make you comment on it because I'll take all the hate. All the bass players around the world are going to be texting me.
That's gone crazy.
Well, I will say that an engineer is right there with the musician, because the musicians, they're delivering something creative, and then the engineer's feeding off of that, and they're doing something creative. Maybe it's with compression or whatever, or sonically. And then the musician hears that and they take it up a notch. And then the engineer goes, oh, if you're going there, I'm going here.
Right.
And that's what you get.
That's a great point.
As opposed to putting a 57 in front of an amp.
Right.
And going, okay, we'll let them deal with it in the mix.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that summing is the beautiful thing about Nashville. It's like it happened in New York a little bit, but we didn't have enough people in the room in New York. We were lucky to have 3 people tracking at the same time. But you get in town here and it's like you feel after a good session, even after me doing it in town for 15 years and 15 years prior to that out of town, I still feel like, wow, I was just a part of that. That felt like we just did a Circus Olay show in Vegas, and I was a part of that process. It's still amazing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. And great musicians. The other thing about great musicians is when they hear compression or hear something that's affecting the sound, they figure out, maybe I got to move my pick here. Maybe I got to not play as hard. It's just like a great drummer playing to the room going, okay, the cymbals are too bright in here. I got to hit them this way.
Right.
I got to balance the kit. I mean, that whole thing is priceless.
Hey, I have a question for you. We're all good friends with Nir Z, the drummer.
Yeah.
And I have to assume that every time Nir Z works with you, he probably talks about the drum sound I get, right?
Yeah. That's it.
Right.
Yeah. He says,
because he does it to me every time he works with me.
It.
Which is like, I know he's not in Jeff Balding sessions telling me about, he's not in Jeff Balding session talking about Joe West. He's always in the Joe West session talking about Jeff Balding drum sound.
Yeah, that's why he called me last night. He said, I've been thinking about Joe's drum sound, and
Yeah. Dude, if I
love Jeff Balding though.
Oh yeah.
Let's talk about you like as a rarefied Arab guys.
Well, you are one of those guys in town that when people talk about you, they talk about it like it's just another level of engineer.
Very much so.
I don't think there's another engineer in town. Maybe Justin Niebank. I've heard some of the same kinds, and Vance Powell. I mean, there's a lot of super talented guys.
There's some great guys, yeah.
But not to say anything about anyone else, to say about Jeff Balding is every time I hear him mentioned, it's that kind of conversation where they're talking about, oh, dude, you don't understand.
1,000% agree. That's Jeff Balding around town.
Oh man.
All right. So this is, I know we're running a little long here. I want to ask you though, I got to ask you, what's it like when you're behind a mixing console and you pull up the faders and the Eagles are on the faders? Like, how does that work in like the ear, brain, eyeball? Like, is that a weird thing for you? It's gotta be.
Yeah. It's intense. Yeah, I mean, anytime you work with an artist like that, especially when you're a fan, and the music means something like that, it is something to pull up a multi-track. And actually, I've pulled up some old multi-tracks for things we've done in the past, from their old records. And you just push it up, and I literally do have to sit there for a little bit and let it soak in. And because it's hard to react, because you're just kind of blown away when you pull up, a guitar track or the drum track or whatever, and you just go, wow, I'm a Victim of Love is one of the tracks I pulled up, and it's like I'm going, man, pull up the room tracks, and it's like, okay, that wasn't an effect, that was actually the room with the leakage from everybody. And you pull up the guitar sound, you go, okay, when I grow up, I want to do that, I want to get that sound.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a lot to wrap your head around, in situations like that.
Here's the thing is that, like, I know this because I know it's true. I know that if you're working on a demo date at 10 a.m. on Wednesday for an artist, for a songwriter on Curb, I know you're swinging just as hard as whenever you've got the Eagles in the room, right? Or some big thing. I know that you're trying just as hard, right? I know this.
Well, you do. Yeah, absolutely. I got one gear.
You got one gear.
I only know how to do things one way. It's funny. I have people go, what, can you just throw this mix together real fast? I don't have much budget, but your rough mix would be better than anybody else. I just want you to throw this together. It's like, dude, I'll do it for the budget, but I only know one way to do it.
One gear.
Yeah,
so tell me, you've got to be thinking to yourself when you get the Eagles up on the console, like, how do I go to the next gear, right? I mean, you can't, the pressure is like, you just want it to be so great because you're so pumped to be on it, but it's like, you're only as good as you're going to be, right? So it's got to be a real conundrum for you to be like, I can't be any better than what I did on the demo session last week.
I think the lesson there is that I've learned over the years is be yourself, not try to be somebody else when you're doing something. Because if you're trying to do something like that guy over there or that girl over there, they're going to be better at it because that's them.
That's true, dude.
And I really, even in tracking, I learned that, it's like, do what feels good. And, some people may not like it because some people, not everybody likes Oreo cookies, maybe, I don't know, but it's one of those things you do where at the end of the session, you're going, man, I did everything I know how to do and I did it as good as I can. And that's all I can do.
Right.
Right. And you wrap your head around that and you go, well, if it's like I'm one of those guys that go, well, if something works, then it was important in my destiny. And if it didn't work, it wasn't key in my destiny. Right. So you kind of, if you don't win something or you don't do something, then it's like, okay, well, that was huge. Cool. I learn from it and you go forward,
If people can take one thing away from this, it's like, I think that's super powerful. If you're looking to steer your career, it's like, find what you do that's really good, that's unique to you. Yeah. It's like, I knew as an engineer and as a songwriter and as a producer, it's like, if I were chasing something, I was C+. I'm not that good at a lot of things, but there's a couple things that are just what I do. And if I dig into those, people seem to respond to that. And that is like, if I were starting off, I would take heed to that. It's like, find what you do great. Find what you do a little bit different. Pay your respects, learn the art. Learn everything you need to learn all the tricks of what better boxes and how to push and gain stage, learn all the rules, then learn where you can break them and find where you fit, your fingerprint fits into that and lean into it. That's brilliant.
Yeah. You got to know what you're good at.
Yeah.
And everybody's be authentic. You got to be authentic too,
I find that everybody is legitimately talented at something unique to them. It's incredible. Yeah. You put Jeff Balding behind a VR, you put Joe West, you put Mike Shimshak, you put a myriad of guys behind it. Same console, same tape. There's going to be very different interpretations of that. Yeah. All the same exact gear. It's going to be very, very different. So that's beautiful that still is the case in the world we live in.
Joe, do we have time for our new segment we were talking about earlier?
Oh, yeah.
It's our first victim.
Uh-oh.
No, it's not. We were talking about starting a new segment of what's on your two bus, because I think people are actually, it's varies so much from engineer to engineer. So just curious if you have generally speaking, I'm sure it changes from mix to mix, but generally speaking, do you have go-tos that are on your two bus?
Yeah. And it does change time. You get tired of something, you start looking for something else. And it's kind of like even the Tannoy. I use Tannoy SGM 10s that I've had for years that Mastering Lab modified. And every time I put them away and bring them back, it's like, why did I put these away? So there are those moments. But right now, two bus, I mean, if I'm mixing Luna, I definitely have a Neve bus set on it so I can push it a little and get that thing out of it. Right now, of all things, I'm kind of into, if I need a little EQ, just going through the Oxford EQ.
Oh, really?
I don't know why I went to that a few months ago, but it's like even sonically going through it, it does something, right? And if I need a subtle, whether it's, even a subtle roll off on bottom, if that's the only thing I do on it, that does a thing to it right now to me. I put a 33609 on the bus. I like to bump that a little bit with the Neve busing, the summing. It sort of compacts it, so I'm not having to do a lot, right?
How hard would you hit it?
I just bump the needles.
Right.
I do the old Fairchild trick, where you just bump it and you get your thing out of it. So I'll use that just just a little. And again, it has to do with character of going through it. And it's a combination of things too. That's the other thing, is like combining the character of this with this piece of gear and this piece of gear. And then you get this, where if you take one out, it doesn't have the soup, right?
Yeah.
So then
You know what your release is normally on that 33609? Is it a longer release? Or?
Man, it's very, very basic. I actually right now I'm using the A1.
Okay, so that's the faster of the auto release.
Yeah. So I'm using that low ratio, 1.5, 2.
Right,
sometimes.
low ratio, right.
Yeah, low ratio.
That's very common. I hear that a ton. So low ratio,
yeah,
1.
Just right a little. Again, I think it's just going through it. And probably the thing I mess with the most is the headroom setting, so that I can get whatever EQ out of that I want, right? And so it just adds a little fat, a little warmth. And then the other thing I went back to, limiters, bus limiters. I've been from Fab Filter to, Isotope to right now I'm on the Oxford.
But it sounds like you don't use a ton of, you're not heavy-handed with the two bus. It's delicate.
No, I don't have to be, because of some of the summing stuff that I'm doing and pushing that. And I do a lot of the shaping on the individual tracks.
Right.
So the stereo bus is just that. Now, the other side of it is, if you really need to get heated or something, I'll put a multi-band on, and I'll goose it for the client, sometimes if they're needing that. I prefer to try to keep it kind of what I got, because sometimes the mastering guy, if you're doing stuff, even when I take the limiter off, sometimes the mastering guy can't match it.
Right.
And so sometimes I'll leave that on, just lower the level, or I'm not limiting, but I'm still getting the character. Because to me, all those plugins are about character. And sometimes I'm using the Manley Massive Passive to get a little of that character if I want to spread it.
These are all
really
plugins you're referring to, right?
Yeah, these are plugins. Hardware is great, but plugins, yeah.
And real quick, when you print a file, how much headroom are you leaving on the file for the peaks? Like how much?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not making it super hot where I'm like making every mastering engineer in town mad. I try to control it. Again, the problem is sometimes you give a heated mix, and I'll send the heated mix to mastering, and sometimes they master that, if they can't get it to do whatever that's doing, which I'll give them the plugin settings. I don't know why they can't, it's just, I guess it's just different DAWs and different systems. The plugins sound and react a little different, is what I think. But in general, I try to print VU meter, like as if I was on a console.
Okay.
So the VU meter's not laying against the red side the whole time, right?
Right.
I mean, I might do that on console if it's a rock record, but in general, I try to give them something that's within the VU range, bouncing up in the red or whatever, but a little bit, but trying to give them something in that range, because if they're going to go through analog gear and mastering, I want to make sure that I'm giving them something that's, not going to mess them up too bad, even though they can gain stage it.
Right. Well, dude, thank you so much for hanging out with us, being so cool.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
This
is fun,
folks. We appreciate Jeff and all he does. Jeff, you got any places on the interwebs that you want to point us towards?
Yeah, I mean, Instagram, Facebook, and head to it.
We'll put those down in the description.
Yeah.
Once again, thanks, man, so much for all you do and for the culture of audio engineering, as well as just being a spectacular, uniquely great, legendary dude. We appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Absolutely.
Thanks, buddy.
My pleasure.
That's it for this week. Signing off. We'll see you next time from the West Barn.